The wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate towered above 12-year-old Marcus like giants from another world. His worn sneakers crunched against the pristine gravel driveway as he clutched the package his mother had entrusted him to deliver. The morning sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns that seemed to stretch endlessly, each blade of grass perfectly trimmed, so different from the patchy yard behind their cramped apartment. Marcus had never seen anything like this place except in movies. The mansion itself was a sprawling white structure with columns that reminded him of pictures from his history textbook, the kind of building where important people lived, people who changed the world or at least had enough money to pretend they did. His mother, Elena, worked 3 jobs to keep their small family afloat, and one of those jobs involved delivering specialty linens to wealthy clients. Today, she was stuck at the hospital with his baby sister Sophia, who had another asthma attack, so Marcus volunteered to make the delivery. He needed the $20 his mother promised him, money he planned to spend on Sophia's birthday present next week. As he approached the massive front door, his reflection caught in the polished brass fixtures, Marcus barely recognized the nervous boy staring back at him. He rang the doorbell, hearing elegant chimes echo somewhere deep within the house, and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. The door swung open to reveal not a stern butler as Marcus expected, but a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Victoria Whitmore stood before him in casual but expensive clothing, a silk scarf draped around her shoulders, looking nothing like the intimidating billionaire his mother had described. She smiled warmly at Marcus, her expression softening when she noticed his threadbare jacket and the carefully wrapped package he held like a precious treasure. "You must be Elena's son," she said, her voice carrying a gentleness that immediately put Marcus at ease. "Please come inside. It's too cold to stand out there." Marcus hesitated, looking down at his dirty sneakers, but Victoria waved away his concerns and ushered him into a foyer that took his breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with clouds and cherubs, marble floors gleamed beneath his feet, and a grand staircase curved upward like something from a fairy tale. Victoria took the package from his trembling hands, then surprised him by offering hot chocolate and cookies. "Your mother speaks of you often," she said, leading him toward what she called the morning room. Marcus followed, overwhelmed by the artwork lining the walls, the antique furniture that probably cost more than his entire apartment building, and the sense that he had stepped into a completely different universe where poverty and struggle didn't exist. The morning room was smaller than the foyer, but no less impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that bloomed despite the autumn chill. Marcus sipped the rich hot chocolate, trying not to stare too obviously at everything around him, when his gaze landed on a wall dedicated entirely to photographs. They were candid shots, vacation pictures, and formal portraits spanning what looked like decades. Victoria was in many of them, younger versions of herself smiling alongside people Marcus didn't recognize. But then his eyes locked onto one particular frame, and the mug nearly slipped from his hands. The photograph showed a man in his 30s, dark curly hair, warm brown eyes, and a crooked smile that Marcus knew better than his own reflection because he saw it in the mirror every single day. It was his father, Roberto, wearing clothes Marcus had never seen him in, standing next to a teenage Victoria in front of what looked like a college building. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walked toward the wall as if pulled by invisible strings. His fingers traced the frame's edge, while his mind raced through impossible explanations. His father had died in a construction accident when Marcus was only 3 years old, leaving behind few possessions and even fewer photographs. His mother kept one picture on their mantel, a faded image of Roberto holding infant Marcus, both of them grinning at the camera. "That's my dad," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with confusion and something else he couldn't name. "Why is my dad's photo in your mansion?" Victoria's face went pale, the color draining so quickly that Marcus thought she might faint. She set down her own cup with shaking hands, tea sloshing over the rim and staining the pristine white tablecloth. For several long moments, she simply stared at Marcus, her eyes moving from his face to the photograph and back again, as if seeing him for the first time. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and questions that hung in the air like ghosts, waiting to be acknowledged. Marcus felt his chest tighten with anxiety, wondering if he had somehow broken an unspoken rule by mentioning the photograph, if he had crossed a line that separated people like him from people like her. "Sit down, Marcus," Victoria finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please sit down. There's something I need to tell you, something your mother apparently never shared." Marcus obeyed, his legs suddenly weak, his mind spinning with possibilities that ranged from reasonable to absolutely insane. Had his father worked here? Had he done gardening or construction for the Whitmore family? But that didn't explain the casual intimacy of the photograph, the way his father and young Victoria stood close together, comfortable and familiar. Victoria walked to a cabinet and poured herself something stronger than tea, her hands still trembling slightly as she returned to her seat. "Roberto was my best friend," she began, her eyes distant with memory. "We grew up together, went to school together, dreamed together. He was like a brother to me, the most genuine person I ever knew." Victoria's story unfolded like a novel Marcus never knew existed, revealing chapters of his father's life that contradicted everything he thought he understood. Roberto hadn't always been a construction worker struggling to make ends meet. He had been brilliant, a scholarship student at an elite university where Victoria's family connections had secured her admission. They had been inseparable, studying together, supporting each other through the pressure and prejudice they faced in different ways, Victoria as a woman in business classes, Roberto as a poor immigrant's son among the privileged elite. Roberto had been studying engineering with dreams of designing sustainable housing for low-income communities, passionate about using his education to lift up people like his own family. Victoria had admired his conviction, his refusal to compromise his values even when offered lucrative positions at firms that prioritized profit over people. But then Victoria's father, the original creator of the Whitmore fortune, had offered Roberto a partnership, a chance to work alongside the family on real estate developments. The catch was that Roberto would have to design luxury properties instead of affordable housing, would have to set aside his dreams to serve the interests of the wealthy. Marcus listened with wide eyes as Victoria described his father's anguish over the decision, how he had agonized for weeks before ultimately refusing the offer. "He chose his principles over prosperity," Victoria said with obvious admiration and regret. "My father was furious," said Roberto, "was throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime. They argued, and my father forbade me from maintaining contact with him." The story grew more painful as Victoria continued, her voice thick with emotion she had apparently suppressed for years. After Roberto refused the partnership, Victoria's father had ensured that doors closed for him throughout the industry. Phone calls were made, recommendations were withdrawn, and Roberto found himself blacklisted from the very field he had studied so passionately. Unable to secure engineering positions, he had taken whatever work he could find to support himself, eventually ending up in construction, not as a designer but as a laborer. Victoria had tried to help secretly, sending money and opportunities through intermediaries, but Roberto's pride wouldn't allow him to accept what he saw as charity. They had lost touch gradually, their last conversation occurring years before Roberto met Elena, before Marcus was born, before the accident that took Roberto's life. "I searched for him periodically," Victoria admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I hired investigators, but Roberto had changed his name slightly, moved frequently, and essentially disappeared into a life of anonymity. I never stopped wondering what happened to him, never stopped regretting that I hadn't fought harder against my father's prejudices." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, hot and righteous, directed at this woman who sat before him in her mansion built on wealth that might have destroyed his father's dreams. But he also saw genuine grief in Victoria's eyes, the kind of sorrow that couldn't be faked or performed. She had lost someone too, he realized, lost a friendship that clearly meant everything to her. "When did you find out he died?" Marcus asked quietly. Victoria wiped her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, composing herself before answering. 3 months ago, she said. "I was going through old files in my father's office after he passed away, and I found a folder labeled with Roberto's name. Inside were investigation reports tracking his life, documenting his marriage to your mother, your birth, and— She paused, her voice breaking. His death 9 years ago. My father had known all along where Roberto was, what happened to him, and he never told me. The revelation sent a chill through Marcus. This man, Victoria's father, had deliberately kept her from knowing about Roberto's fate, had allowed her to wonder and search futilely for years. Marcus thought about the cruelty of that deception, the way it had stolen Victoria's chance to reconcile with her friend, to attend his funeral, to offer support to the family he left behind. The reports mentioned Elena's linen delivery business. Victoria continued. I began ordering from her company specifically, hoping to find a way to connect with Roberto's family, to somehow make amends for what my father did, for what I failed to do. But I didn't know how to approach your mother, didn't know if she even knew Roberto, and I had been friends. Marcus's mind reeled with this information. His mother's suddenly improved business, the wealthy client who ordered expensive linens regularly and paid generously, it had all been Victoria trying to help from the shadows, trying to absolve herself of guilt that perhaps wasn't entirely earned. Does my mom know? Marcus asked. Does she know who you really are? Victoria stood and walked to an antique desk in the corner of the room, retrieving a worn envelope that looked like it had been handled countless times. She held it carefully, almost reverently, before handing it to Marcus. This was in the folder my father kept, she explained. Roberto wrote it years ago, after our falling out, but he never sent it. My father's investigators obtained it somehow. I don't want to know how. With trembling fingers, Marcus opened the envelope and began reading his father's familiar handwriting, words he had only seen on the occasional birthday card his mother had saved. The letter was addressed to Victoria, explaining Roberto's decision to refuse the partnership, his dreams of creating change from outside the system of wealth and privilege, and his hope that she would understand. But more than that, the letter expressed Roberto's wish that Victoria would someday use her position and resources to help people the way he had always wanted to remember where they both came from and who they had wanted to become. He believed in you, Marcus said, looking up from the letter. Even after everything, he thought you could make a difference. Victoria nodded, fresh tears flowing. After I found these documents, I established a foundation in Roberto's name. We're building affordable housing developments designed with sustainability and dignity, exactly the kind of projects he dreamed about. I should have done it years ago, should have honored his vision regardless of my father's wishes. But she trailed off, the weight of regret obvious in every word. Marcus understood then why Victoria had been so kind when she opened the door, why she spoke of his mother with such respect. She wasn't just a wealthy woman ordering linens. She was someone trying to build a bridge across years of separation and loss. The conversation that followed stretched into hours as Victoria shared stories about Roberto that Marcus had never heard, his terrible singing voice, his love of old movies, his habit of sketching building designs on napkins while eating lunch. She painted a picture of a man who was more than the tragic figure Marcus had imagined, more than the absent father he barely remembered. Roberto had been funny and stubborn and idealistic, qualities that Marcus suddenly recognized in himself. When Marcus finally asked if his mother knew about Victoria's connection to Roberto, Victoria shook her head. I've wanted to tell her, wanted to explain everything, but I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid she would see me as the person who represented everything that made Roberto's life difficult. Afraid she would reject any help I tried to offer. So I've stayed silent, ordering linens and paying well, hoping it made some small difference. Marcus thought about his mother working multiple jobs, thought about their apartment where the heat didn't always work and the refrigerator made concerning noises. He thought about his sister's medical bills and the way his mother cried sometimes when she thought no one could hear. She deserves to know, Marcus said firmly. She deserves to know that someone cared about Dad the way you did, that his dreams mattered to someone besides just us. Victoria agreed, and together they called Elena. Marcus watched Victoria's face as she spoke to his mother, explaining everything, the friendship, the falling out, the search, the foundation. He heard his mother's voice through the phone, shock and disbelief giving way to something softer, something that sounded like understanding and perhaps the beginning of forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's world transformed in ways he never could have imagined. Victoria didn't just throw money at their problems, though she did help with Sophia's medical care and their apartment's heating system. Instead, she became part of their lives, attending Sophia's birthday party in their tiny living room, eating Elena's home-cooked meals, and treating them not as charity cases, but as the family of someone she had loved. Elena and Victoria formed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared connection to Roberto and their determination to honor his memory. Elena shared stories about the man Roberto had become after leaving the world Victoria knew, still principled, still kind, still dreaming of better things even while working exhausting jobs. Victoria listened with gratitude, grateful for these glimpses of the years she had missed. The foundation in Roberto's name began its first housing project, and Marcus attended the groundbreaking ceremony. He watched as Victoria spoke about her friend's vision, saw his father's name on the plaque, and understood that some dreams don't die when people do, they just wait for others to carry them forward. Marcus also learned something important about wealth and poverty, about the arbitrary nature of circumstance, and the choices that define us more than our bank accounts. Victoria had money, but she had also lost years with someone who mattered. Marcus had grown up poor, but he had his mother's love and his father's principles embedded in everything she taught him. Standing in Victoria's mansion months after that first shocking discovery, Marcus looked at the photograph of his father and saw not just a lost parent, but a legacy worth continuing. He was starting at a new school, one that Victoria's foundation supported, where he could pursue his own dreams of architecture and design. But more than that, he carried forward his father's belief that success meant nothing if it didn't lift others up, that the measure of a life wasn't in what you accumulated, but in what you gave away. "Thank you," he told Victoria, and she understood he meant for more than just the opportunities she had provided. He was thanking her for remembering, for caring, for proving that his father's life had mattered beyond the small circle of people who knew him. "No," Victoria replied, looking at the photograph with a smile. "Thank you for reminding me why any of this matters at all." And in that moment, Marcus understood that the unbelievable thing wasn't just finding his father's photograph in a billionaire's mansion. It was discovering that love, friendship, and principle could transcend wealth, time, and even death itself, connecting people across impossible divides and creating families from the most unexpected circumstances.